Hey, what's up guys, it's DarkArmedDuelist, and today we're going to be doing a Buster Blader deck profile. So I'm really excited this week guys, because this deck is a really amazing deck that can totally lock your opponent down with awesome boss monsters like your Buster Blader, the Dragon Destroyer Swordsman, and even an old school classic boss monster that I've worked into the deck that you guys will see later on in the deck profile. So without further ado guys, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, hit the bell in there so you can become part of the notification squad, and definitely check out the Patreon down in the description below for all those awesome rewards like getting your name in the description of every single video, getting assigned cards in the mail, and even getting to request a deck profile every single month to your patron along with test hands. So without further ado, let's get straight on into this. So first off, we're playing 2 copies of Buster Blader. So I've just bumped Buster Blader down to 2 because I'm playing some really interesting engines in this deck, but this card is a great classic boss monster that gains 500 attack points for every dragon monster to your opponent's side of the field and in the graveyard, which is a great effect to just get a really big boss monster on your side of the field and use this card as fusion material to go into some really awesome boss monsters. We're then playing a single copy of Buster Blader, the Destruction Swordsman. This card is a really neat one-of that counts as a Buster Blader while it's on the field or in the graveyard. And if a monster your opponent controls is destroyed by battle or by card effect and sent to the graveyard, you can target one of those destroyed monsters and equip it to this card. And then once per turn, you can send a monster that you control that's equipped to this card to the graveyard to destroy all monsters your opponent controls with the same type as that monster that was sent to the grave, which is an awesome effect just to be able to send those monsters to the graveyard and be able to equip them to this card, because a lot of decks are running around right now that are graveyard heavy, and basically this card does not let them hit the graveyard, which is super helpful. We then play 3 of the best normal summon in the entire deck, which is 3 copies of Buster Whelp of the Destruction Swordsman. This card is a neat card that when this card is normal summon, you get to add a Destruction Sword card from your deck to your hand, which is a great effect. You always want to see this card because this card comes in so handy to be able to grab the exact card that you need, but it also has 2 really neat effects that you can only activate either or of them per turn, that you can either tribute this card to special summon a Buster Blader from your hand or graveyard, or if this card is in your graveyard and you control a Buster Blader, you can discard a Destruction Sword and special summon this card back to your side of the field to then use this card as a tuner monster to synchro summon into some really neat synchro monsters. We then play a single copy of the Dragon Buster Destruction Sword. I feel like 1 is totally fine in this particular build. This card is really neat because when it's equipped to a monster, it makes it so that your opponent cannot special summon from the extract. So this card is a really good one-of in here, just in case you need to lock your opponent down from the extra deck. We then play a single copy of Dogmatica Ecclesia. Ecclesia is a good one-of in here because what this card does is you can special summon, if this card, or if a monster special summon from the extra deck is on the field, you can special summon this card from your hand. And if this card is normal or special summon, you can activate the effect to add any Dogmatica card from your deck to your hand, except another copy of itself. But you can't special summon monsters from the extra deck for the rest of the turn, which is totally fine because we're actually going to be special summoning our monsters from the extra deck during our opponent's turn with a trap card. So this card is a great one-of in here, especially with the other cards that we're playing. We then play a single copy of Fleur-de-Lis. Fleur-de-Lis is a good one-of as well to be able to search this card off your copy of Ecclesia, because during the main phase, if a monster special from the extra deck is on the field, quick effect, you can special summon this card from your hand. Then, if you control another Dogmatica card, you can negate the effects of 1 face-up monster on the field into the end of this turn. And then, when a Dogmatica monster declares an attack, you can make all Dogmatica monsters you currently control gain 500 attack, which is pretty good to be able to go up all the way up to 3k on this monster, which is pretty nice. We then play a single copy of Red Eyes Wyvern because we're going to send this card to the graveyard off our Red Eyes Insight, 1 copy of Red Eyes Black Dragon, and a single copy of Dark Magician so we can go into our copy of Red Eyes Dark Dragoons. And we have another really awesome boss monster that may or may not use Dark Magician to summon it. We then play 3 copies of Ash Blossom as well to round out the monsters. The Ash Blossoms are basically here just to stop your opponent from touching the deck. So this card is a very handy 3-of in this particular build. So that's it for the monsters, guys. Let's get into the spells. So for the spells, we're going to be playing a single copy of Called by the Grave. Called by the Grave is in here because this card is a great card to stop your opponent from hand trapping you, which is why I play this card as a one-of. We play 2 copies of Red Eyes Insight because this card searches Red Eyes Fusion, which is one of the most important cards in the entire build to be able to get to, so you can summon your Red Eyes Dark Dragoons to your side of the field alongside your copy of your Buster Blader, the Dragon Destroyer Swordsman, and Buster Dragon. It is just an absolutely insane field that you can establish with both of those those monsters or all 3 of those monsters. Play a single copy of Magicalized Fusion. Magicalized Fusion is in here because we can go into some really powerful extra deck monsters with this card, which is why I play it as a 3 of in here. We then play, or 1 of in here, and then we play 3 copies of Red Eyes Fusion because we really want to get to our Dragoons as soon as possible. So we basically play 5 copies of Red Eyes Fusion because we're trying to use it with our copies of Red Eyes Insight, or draw into it regularly, or even go into Anaconda to be able to get to this card as quickly as possible, alongside of our copies of our Buster Blader, the Dragon Destroyer Swordsman. We then play 3 copies of Nadir. This card is a great 3 of in here. If this card does go to 1 on the list, which it possibly could, you can change this out for 2 more copies of Ecclesia, which is an option for you guys if you want to play that way. This card is really neat effect that you could send a monster from your extra deck to the graveyard and then add a Dogmatica monster or a Fault of Albaz from your deck or graveyard to your hand that has attack less than or equal to the sent monster in the graveyard. But for the rest of your this card resolves, you cannot special monsters from the extra deck. This card easily can be interchanged out with 2 more copies of Ecclesia if this card does go to 1. We then play 3 copies of Crossout Designator because we really don't want to get hand trapped on the Red Eyes Fusion. The majority of the time, our opponent is just going to throw an Ash Blossom at us, which is why we're playing the 3 copies of Ash Blossom in the main deck, along with a couple of trap cards to be able to block with this card's effect. So this card's a really neat card to basically just protect us from Ash Blossoms and cards like that. So that's it for these spells, guys. Let's get into the traps, where the deck really starts to excel. So for the traps, we're going to be playing a single copy of Dogmatica Punishment. This card is a great 1 of in here because this card is easily searchable off your copies of your Ecclesia, and it lets you target a face-up monster opponent controls, send a monster with a higher attack from equal or higher attack from your deck, extra deck, to the graveyard, and if you do, destroy that monster. But until the end of your next turn, after this card resolves, you can't special monsters from the extra deck, which is again not that big of a deal because we usually want to go first anyways and establish our board, and then you're going to basically set this card up to be able to destroy later. We then play 2 copies of Trap Trick. Trap Trick is a really good 2 of in here because it gives us access to all of our other trap cards in the deck, which is why I play this card as a 2 of. We play 2 copies of Destruction Sword Memories, which is an insanely powerful fusion trap card. Lets you discard a Destruction Sword card, especially when a Buster Blader monster from your deck, but that's not the really good effect. The really good effect of this card is that you can banish this card from the graveyard to fusion summon 1 Buster Blader, the Dragon Destroyer Swordsman, from your extra deck by banishing fusion materials listed on it from your graveyard, which is an absolutely insanely powerful effect to be able to just banish this card at any time to be able to fusion summon into your Buster Blader, the Dragon Destroyer Swordsman, which is just really a great boss monster. We then play 3 copies of Prologue of the Destruction Swordsman, which is probably the best card in the entire deck and the card that you're going to want to see first. It lets you send a Destruction Sword and a Buster Blader monster from your deck to the graveyard, except another copy of itself, and then special summon a Buster Dragon from your extra deck or graveyard, but destroyed during the end phase of the next turn. And you can manage this card from the graveyard, and this turn, Destruction Sword cards that you control cannot be destroyed by battle or by card effects. But the main effect of this card is you're trying to get that double Foolish Burial to get your copies of Memories to the graveyard, to then be able to use it as a fusion trap to be able to go into your copy of your Buster Blader, the Dragon Destroyer Swordsman. We then play 3 copies of Infinite Impermanence. Infinite Impermanence is another card that we use to block with our copies of Nobleman, or our copies of Crossout Designator. This card is a great card. You can bump it down to 1 and play 2 other hand traps that you feel like you might be having problems with, but I really like to play this card at 3 because it's a really good 3 of to be able to just stop your opponent. You can change it out for a copy of Effect Veiler and a Forbidden Chalice if you want to change it out for those 2 cards, and play 1 Impermanence, 1 Chalice, and 1 Effect Veiler to be able to really stop your opponent from hitting you with any hand traps at all in this deck. We then play 3 copies of Solemn Strike as well. The 3 copies of Solemn Strike are in here because they protect my copies of Red Eyes Fusion later on in the games. They help me protect with my copies of my Prologue. They protect any card that you need that your opponent's going to drop something against you, because when a monster would be special summoned or a monster effect is activated, you pay 1500 life points to negate the summon or the activation if you do destroy that card, which the majority of the time hand traps are actually going to be monsters. So this card comes in very handy at stopping those cards as well, and stopping your opponent from summoning a really powerful boss monster while we're trying to get set up. So that's it for the main deck, guys. Let's get into the extra deck. So for the extra deck, we're going to be playing 2 copies of the Buster Blader, the Dragon Destroyer Swordsman. You really only need 2 copies of this card because once you summon it once, you're probably going to win. It has the ability that it must be fusion summoned and cannot be special summoned by other ways, and it requires a Buster Blader plus any dragon type monster. And this card cannot attack directly, and this card gains 1,000 attack and defense for each dragon monster your opponent controls or in their graveyard. And you change all dragon monsters your opponent controls to defense position, and also dragon type monsters in your opponent's possession cannot activate their effects. And this card attacks a defense position monster. It does piercing damage. So this card can get really, really big, especially if you have your copy of your Buster Dragon on your side of the field, because basically this card is going to turn into a skill drain and a Baguska all at once and be able to do piercing damage as a big boss monster. We then play 2 copies of our Red Eyes Dark Dragoons, which is a great boss monster in this deck as well, to combo with your copy of your Buster Blader, the Dragon Destroyer Swordsman. This card is an absolute tank of a monster because it cannot be destroyed by card effects. Neither player can target it with card effects. During the main phase, you can destroy up to 2 monsters because you're going to put 2 vanillas in this card to be able to burn your opponent for the attack points of that monster, which is just insane. And then also, if that wasn't good enough, you also get a walking negate with this card, because if your opponent activates any card effect, you can discard a card, negate the activation, and if you do, destroy that card. And then this card gains an additional 1,000 attack points. This card is a great boss monster for this deck to pair with your copies of your Buster Blader, the Dragon Destroyer Swordsman. We then play a single copy of Dark Paladin, which is the classic monster that I was mentioning at the very beginning of this profile. This card is actually really good in this deck because this card cannot be special summoned except by fusion summon, and as long as this card remains face up on the field, you can negate the activation of 1 spell card and destroy the spell card by discarding any card from your hand. And the attack of this card is increased by 500 points for each dragon type monster on the field and in either player's graveyard. So this card can get relatively big and is the original version of your copy of Red Eyes Dark Dragoon, because Dark Paladin is an old school version of Dragoon, and Dragoon is a retrain of Paladin, which is just such a cool aspect of looking at these 2 cards, because they even have the same kind of sword, which is just really cool. We then play a single copy of Titaniclad, because it's a card that you're going to be sending to the graveyard off your copy of Dogmatic Punishment to get that additional search during the end phase, which is super helpful. Double Elder Entity Nist, because this card is also a card that you can send to the graveyard off your copy of your Dogmatic Punishment to be able to pop cards, which is why I played at 2 in this deck. We play 2 copies of Buster Dragon. Buster Dragon is a great card in this deck as well, because this card, when it's on the field, all other monsters that your opponent control become dragons, and then once per turn, if you don't control a Buster Blader monster, you can target a Buster Blader in the graveyard and special summon it. And then once per turn during your opponent's turn, you can target a Buster Blader monster you control and equip it with 1 Destruction Sword card from your graveyard, and it's a quick effect, which is why I played just a single copy of the Destruction Sword monster in the main deck, because you can basically make it really easily with this card. We then play a single copy of Hot Red Dragon Archfiend Abyss, because this card is easily made with your copy of Buster Dragon, with just a level 1 tuner monster. 1 copy of Protector Whelp, because this card is a really good Buster Blader. Link monster that discards Link Summon, you send a Destruction Sword card from your deck to the graveyard. Then you can special summon a Buster Blader monster from your hand. And at the end of the battle phase, if your opponent controls no monsters, then you can target a Buster Blader monster you control that did not declare an attack this turn and inflict damage to your opponent equal to that monster's attack. So if your opponent does decide not to summon monsters, because we have the copy of the Buster Blader, the Dragon Destroyer Swordsman, that can't attack directly, you can summon this and basically do 2,800 to them, which is really good. We then play 2 copies of Anaconda, because Anaconda is really pivotal in this deck to be able to go into for your copy of Dragoons, which is why I play it as a 2 of, and then a single copy of Linkuriboh, because Linkuriboh is really good with our Link or level 1 monsters, which is why I play it as a 1 of. So that's it for the deck, guys. I hope you did enjoy it. It's a really fun deck to play. I really love the way that you can play Dark Paladin and Red Eyes Dark Dragoons in the same deck, along with your copies of your Buster Blader, the Dragon Destroyer Swordsman. It's a really awesome strategy, and it's a deck that I wouldn't hesitate to carry to a locals or even a regionals to be able to compete with this deck, because this deck has had really good competitive success and is just a really fun deck overall to play. So anyways, guys, this is DarkArmedDuelist. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, hit the bell next so you can become part of the notification squad, and we'll see you guys in the next video. See you later, guys.